Students arrive with any one of 1,000 barriers to learning, and many of those require deep empathy, contextual knowledge, understanding a relational skill, just to motivate that student to be open to learning. So an AI school that has 100% highly motivated and engaged students, I'm sure magical things could happen. I'm all for it.
My name's Sabrina Ramana. Super excited today to be speaking with Laura Knight. She's the CEO of Sapio with over 20 years teaching experience, and she's also written a book, The Little Guide for Teachers on Generative AI. So super excited to have you here, Laura. Thanks so much. Would love to hear a little bit more about your background.
Thank you so much for having me, Sabrina. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I'm a teacher of 20 years turned, I suppose, educational consultant, but in the sense of wanting to really explore how to use technology well in education. And so much of that is about the humans, as I'm sure we all understand that the technology is one piece in that small puzzle. I do a lot of work with schools, with groups of schools and leadership associations. I do keynote speaking and training, and lots of strategy work sort of internationally, looking at how best to deploy technologies, how to support young people to thrive, and how to think about opportunity in an AI-infused world in particular. It's a really exciting time to be in that space.
What's the current culture and emotion when it comes to using generative AI in an education setting?
This space is traditionally quite conservative about change and about pace, and there is a very good reason for that. You get one shot at like 7th grade or whatever, and so it's absolutely right that educators and leaders should be cautious about we're just going to sling the curriculum out the door and do something else this year. No, we don't do that. We don't gamble with kids' futures in that way. So we do expect teachers and leaders to be a little cautious about new disruptive technologies. And so I would say that probably there are about 20 to 30% of educators who are in a really exciting phase of exploration, and lots of folks engaging and quite early in their journey, I would say. There are still lots, though, who have not yet explored what this could mean for them professionally. And I think that, unfortunately, there's been an academic snobbery about cheating, about intellectual integrity, around not doing the work, that kind of thing, which has got in the way somewhat. And people have got very caught up in a couple of red herrings, and we can dive into that some more, but particularly thinking about examinations, about cheating and coursework, the kind of work that might happen along the journey rather than sitting in an exam hall. And there's quite a lot of questions around what it means for teachers to do the work too. So in terms of that litmus test, probably a quite traditional kind of innovation curve, as you would expect in terms of adoption, but slightly more cautious than more commercial sectors, with good reason. And so the work we have to do now is about exploring how to support those teachers who are at the front end and the leaders who are at the front end, and really help them to conceptualize the art of the possible, helping people appreciate how to solve the problems in their context and how to explore the meaning of the technology for them. And then thinking about the teaching and learning side of it, and thinking about school as a business, school as an organization, and how you look at some of those more systemic and organizational pieces too. So it's an exciting time for sure.
What's the typical path that you might walk a school through? Like you mentioned, a couple red herrings that schools will usually focus on. Cheating for sure is a really big one. But how do you get them from focusing on those red herrings to here's what we want to focus on in order to move forward and figure this thing out?
Sure. So I think the first issue, red herring wise, is that there is a kind of trap that we tend to fall into. And so we get stuck in a vortex of, here are all the cool things that you can do with the technology. And then there's this sort of retrofitting of purpose that happens after the fact, which isn't actually that helpful when you want to be driven by sort of pedagogical goals. That's the first one, that we get blinded by the science, and it's like, what cool things can I do with the tech? So there's the particular question around purpose versus technology, and which comes first. It's right that we should look at opportunity differently when a disruptive technology arrives that can actually change fundamentally some of those pieces. However, it's a problem. And the other piece is how folks get caught up in one or two really emotive issues around workload. We know that workload for teachers is challenging. I don't think there are very many teachers in the world who could honestly say that they are bored, they haven't got enough to do, they're like looking for things to fill their day. It just does not happen, right? And so for us to think about workload meaningfully really matters. And unfortunately, there are some of those issues that typically tend to be emotive for teachers because they always put them under more pressure. And one of those, for example, in the context where I'm at here in the UK is reporting to parents. So taking the progress information and the kinds of insights that the teacher wants to share with families about the child's progress and putting that into a format which is then received by the parent. Now, that traditionally is one of those transactions that very much like a bank statement used to be, was something that you would have to sort of check in regularly. There were no data dashboards or data drops or any of those kinds of things. You had to wait for the teacher to have like a parent's consultation or indeed to send a report. Things are changing, but yet we hold on to these old transactions, these old proxies for what good practice looks like in education. And teachers, of course, are like saying, well, it's not really worth our time. It takes a lot of time for not very much impact. And so there's some great research around, well, what really does have impact and what's worth holding on to and what do we need to let go of? The red herring issue comes about when we move the goalposts in a way that feels disingenuous for the receiver of the information. So if families consider that one of the transactional aspects of the deal of sending their kid to that school is that they get high quality reporting, and then very quietly, without talking about it, suddenly those reports are delivered in a way that uses AI, there are going to be parents who feel that they've been shortchanged, that there is some aspect of that does not meet their expectations. And so that's where some of the cultural pieces around what it means to do the work for teachers, what does it mean to gather insight on progress, to report to parents, to produce high quality targets for a child, and who or what needs to do that in a way that is equitable and effective. And really what's helpful in terms of teacher time, because the resource, the scarce resource, the contact that happens between the humans, the joyful, productive, powerful moments that teachers have interacting with their students that motivate and engage and create a sense of community, right? That is key. Time spent planning amazing experiences and bringing professional expertise and subject knowledge to bear, that is key. Spending hours on admin and filling in Excel spreadsheets that are only then going to sit in files, never to be touched again, that's not. And so my view is, let's look critically at how we spend time and how we think about engagement and use AI to make the very best of that experience for everyone.
I'm definitely curious what you think about some of the AI schools that are popping up, at least here in the US, one in Texas, or one approved in Arizona. At first, when I read about it, it said, only 2 hours of AI-led instruction. And I thought, oh, wait, that's it? What did the kids do the rest of the day? But as I learned more about it, there is a teacher for the rest of the day. And there is like exploratory work, going outdoors, going to different places, learning kind of with the world, not just in a classroom memorizing facts. And so I'm really curious your take on that model. Is that model the future, or do you see kind of another iteration?
With the right pedagogical inputs, with the right research foundation and high quality bar, really high quality bar in terms of training data and educationally rigorous models, we can support students brilliantly in a very specific way. However, what is tricky is remembering that students arrive with any one of 1,000 barriers to learning, and many of those require deep empathy, contextual knowledge, understanding a relational skill, just to motivate that student to be open to learning. So an AI school that has 100% highly motivated and engaged students, I'm sure magical things could happen. I'm all for it. And I'm certainly all for taking the opportunity to leverage that one-to-one personalization experience that we can have for children who are already engaged, curious, and on a pathway that feels meaningful to them. I certainly think there is particular opportunity here to build skill and experience founded on the interest of the child, because that is so meaningful for them. So there is great potential. If it is indeed wrapped around by human support that gives that child the appropriate contextual meaning for it, that gives them a pathway that has kind of structural sense, we're essentially building, if you imagine bricks in a wall that create foundational structures for ideas. And if the foundational pieces at the bottom of the wall are not that great, what happens above is going to be shaky or patchy or have gaps in it that will eventually tumble when challenged. And so this idea of schema is so important, and that's why the models really matter, but also the humans with the deep subject knowledge also matter, who are the architects of that journey.
Yeah, I love how you started it with empathy. I made a short TikTok video on this topic, and I don't normally talk about my teenage years, but I was a very good student in the academic sense. But as a teenager, I struggled with like existential angst. And the teachers I remember from kind of my high school, middle school period trusted are the ones who could see through kind of everything I was doing, the facade I was putting up, and really help me think about those deeper questions around purpose. And also they challenged me in my BS because they could tell it was just BS behavior. And they challenged me to be more and like hold me to a higher standard and think about having a bigger impact. And those are the teachers who like I still kind of carry with me, their memory, their impact decades later.
And great learning happens because those teachers met you where you were in that moment and how you were showing up to learning, to the experience. There would have been a lot of stuff that maybe was creating challenges and obstacles for you. There were some doors that needed unlocking, and it takes a certain amount of humanity and empathy to do that. Now, am I saying that AI is incapable of bringing some of that to the table? Absolutely not. I totally think that's possible. But if the child is not willing to engage, you can have all the code in the world, the results won't happen. What I would love to see is an exploration of how we enable flourishing on an individual and collective basis. And that experience of learning is inherently social in so many ways. We learn from each other as much as we do in that sort of teacher-student direction. So if we can harness the best of those, I should say, and bring it all together, there is such amazing scope. The danger I feel is in an all or nothing model where we're going to say, just for the big headlines, it is an AI school and we're going to just park students in cubicles and we're going to make them feel like they're in a call center, but that from the age of 12, really not. While there might be a small minority of children who will benefit enormously from a low stimulation environment like that, the vast majority I don't think would. And so let's take the best of what we have and build on it rather than throw it all out in the favor of something new.
And it's really tough because the media obviously emphasizes the polar extremes. So on my typical LinkedIn, I'll see posts about new research and studies are coming out saying use of AI kind of dulls children's mind. They're actually learning less effectively when they use AI. But then I'll also see the complete opposite of that. Teachers who are using AI in their classroom and it stimulates creativity. It addresses the personalization aspect. Maybe some kids learn through reading, maybe other kids learn visually, maybe other kids want to explore different sets of curiosities, and AI can accommodate for that while still teaching kind of the core fundamentals for that lesson. And so I kind of see these polar extremes all the time. That tends to be what goes viral, you know.
Of course, because it's the thing that is going to most annoy everyone in the middle and at the other end, right? Those polar experiences are so part of our social media world that we almost forget that that's not how life is, right? What we experience in real terms is something that's filled with nuance. And so my hope is that bringing that voice of nuance, exploring and being aware of those polar positions and then looking at how we make the best of them is so interesting about children and learning and the concerns. These concerns have existed ever since technology, like Industrial Revolution type times, when it was
calculator.
Right. It's always been assumed that the technology would mean that people couldn't think anymore and that there was going to be a dulling of skill. And this is a classic human response to an innovation, and we should be familiar with it right now. But yet here we are with these same myths and these same things being repeated and repeated and repeated. And I think that we just have to get past it. And what I want for school leaders and for educators is to have a really informed and nuanced view. Put an adverb in that sentence about technology usage and AI usage. If you use AI blank, then this will happen. If you use AI badly, then things will happen. If you use it well, if you leverage the power of it to your advantage, there is so much scope to deepen your learning, to broaden your understanding, whatever it happens to be. If you use it to take shortcut, what do you expect will happen? Like, you will be going through that process of intellectual offloading where you're just delegating. And it's exactly the same in many ways as the Wikipedia generation, millennials, right, who were going through school when Wikipedia sort of arrived in their world, and they just copied and pasted whole swathes of stuff with the links and everything, just dumped it right in their homework. It's the same thing in a way where you're just offloading the responsibility of producing the learning and just hoping that you'll get away with it, knowing that there may be a consequence if you're caught, but hoping that you'll get away with it. And what I think is interesting here is actually there's a question for teachers: process of learning versus product of learning. You know, the examination system where you kind of say you have to study and study and study, and then at the end of your course you sit a high stakes examination. That's one model, right? But there are many other models of producing evidence of your learning. And actually, I think there's something really interesting about being accountable to the process, capturing the process, looking at what happens along the journey, the mistakes, the messy bits, the drafts, and helping students understand that that process, inelegant though it may be, is important. And you don't just have to produce the beautiful, neat, final version, that seeing the rest of it actually makes it more real and shows your own thinking journey. So I think certainly that process versus outcome question needs to be asked. And the other thing I think we need to be asking is about task design. Lots of overworked teachers who are like, I have a worksheet, I have something, I have a PowerPoint, and like, that'll do, that'll have to do, because that's all I have time for. If we can support educators in using AI, using generative AI powerfully to leverage like the improvement, even just a micro improvement of existing resources, and say, I've got this PowerPoint, I've been doing this deck since 2014. Actually, could we make some improvements in this way, and this way, and align it with that? It's not very difficult to make incremental shifts to improve things just a little, and to start seeing things, seeing results for students improve, seeing engagement improve, seeing optionality, seeing accessibility, all of these things. And I think there's so much scope for us to do a little better in lots of ways, rather than feel like we have to make expansive, enormous change all in one go. For sure.
I'm sure a lot of educators are listening to this. What are maybe 3 concrete examples of something they're probably doing very manually today and is not a high ROI activity? It's not really what they want to be doing, but they have to do it. And then how would you recommend they start improve that process and save them time?
My first one is generating questions. Practice questions. We know that once we have delivered some input to students, what they need is practice and large volumes of it. And the best teachers can generate questions quickly and easily and extensively, right? But it's still a time-consuming business. And for teachers who are at the beginning of their careers, actually writing questions and answers can be really time-consuming. And finding high-quality examples is difficult when you don't know what amazing looks like. So if you take a topic and you want to generate 10 entry-level questions, 10 more developing challenge questions, and then another 10 that are really going to stretch or link to another topic. And then perhaps you want a further 10 that have got additional scaffolds for students with learning difficulties or disabilities. All of a sudden, we're creating a large volume of practice experiences for our students, and we can make sure they're aligned with our curriculum. Now, you can do that on any of the main ChatGPT, whether it happens to be, whichever model is your preference. And there are also education specialist tools. So in the UK, we have TeachMate AI, which is great, and we'll do a brilliant job on this. The US equivalent, Magic School AI, also does a super job. And there's a wonderful tool called Diffit, which is brilliant for creating questions and materials on a particular topic for any age range. So I certainly think questions is where I would start. The second thing, which is incredibly time consuming, is gamification. Engagement is so important, and we take it for granted that when we talk about the idealistic world of education and technology, that the children are all perfectly behaved and sitting there just waiting to be fed the knowledge. It's like, no. So instead, we need to think about a way of engaging students and helping them stay motivated through the learning experience, not just at the start, but all the way through. And I think gamification is incredibly powerful, but it's time consuming to take an old-fashioned PowerPoint deck or a set of worksheets and gamify it. But with ChatGPT or any of the other platforms, it is so straightforward to give it those resources and say, hey, I want to create a class challenge over a series of 3 lessons. I want 5 teams. I want a points-based system. And this is what I want. And it will produce it for you with the rewards and everything. Beautiful. So I certainly think gamification is brilliant. And the third thing is adaptive teaching. Adaptive teaching for all of the many needs of the students, so that every student can have their learning needs met with agency. So it's not just that it's a one-way street where the teacher is delivering the learning to the students and the teacher can make all the decisions around adapting their materials for the needs of the student. It's also about using students' own agency to make decisions about the AI tools they can deploy for their own needs. So whether that is moving content into a format is more digestible for them, whether it's adjusting reading age, whether it is creating pictorial forms, for example, or again, different forms of gamification. Adaptive teaching is time consuming, and it takes a lot of planning and resourcing. So such a powerful way for teachers to, what ChatGPT and the other platforms, superb for creating adaptive versions and scaffolded versions of resources for their students.
That's a lot that teachers can do today. It really brings to mind the point that like you could focus just on cheating and like how sensitive a topic that is, or you could try to play around, experiment with all the different ways that you could be using ChatGPT in the classroom. So I love that for teachers. I also want to talk about the perspective of students. And so how are you finding them kind of navigating all this confusion? Because on one hand, they've been receiving a lot of messages, don't use AI, AI is bad. And now we're talking about reintroducing it to the classroom with all these positive benefits. How do you navigate that conversation with students? How do students feel about that?
Such an interesting take. Innovation is something we don't fully understand in the education space. Is block it, ban it, and don't talk about it. So you ban something, everyone carries on using it, just doesn't talk about it and uses it badly. So I think we, again, have to evolve our thinking about this and ensure that we are delivering an understanding to students which actually starts really young. Digital literacy, media literacy, these are things that we should be teaching to children long before they get their first smartphone. Right? Long before, because they need to understand conceptually what it means to work with artificial intelligence before, for example, they're faced with Snapchat's My AI sitting alongside their friends list, like as tweens. Because at that point, they're already in the ecosystem. And if they don't know what they're dealing with, then it's not helpful. So the first is that digital citizenship piece that we have to start early. The second is that we need to let go of that really unhelpful digital natives BS. I'm calling it out. Children are naive experts in that they might easily understand how to use technology through experimentation and play because they're given the opportunity to, in the same way that the kids of the 80s could work out how to program the VCR. It was not rocket science, right? But what matters is that we teach them how to use it well, and that we build a curriculum for that purpose. When do we teach this? Whose job is this? Where does it sit? It's not computer science. It's not English. Like, what is this? And so I think the very best schools are looking at the way that they are teaching this in a really intentional way. They're looking at it. I like to use the sort of an ecosystem metaphor, a bit like a coral reef, where you imagine a harmonious ecosystem of lots of different tools. There is also a real sense of everything working together. And so we have to teach children how to use it explicitly for the right purposes, young, and then we are going to help them use it well as they move forwards. Now, we've got some challenges around age limits. Oh, and haven't we seen this before? And we have not learned from it. So it frustrates, and it shows, doesn't it? It frustrates me no end that we are still having conversations around copper and around the age of 13, and it being this kind of age verification loop of doom where we talk about what's right and we talk about what's legal, and what actually happens is so divorced from that there are children on social media apps who have grown up lying about their age, completely normal. Why on earth would they do anything different when they land up, signing up for whatever AI tool it is that may not even be dressed as an AI tool, that may be looking like, this is just a cool thing to make filters for my photos. Actually, that's for making deep fakes, but hey ho. How we dress things and how they're marketed to children in particular, there's some really concerning things from a safeguarding perspective about that I think we should be looking at from a regulatory perspective, but also from a parent's education piece too, around digital well-being and understanding age-appropriate boundaries for youngsters with some of this technology. We should be putting a curriculum in. We should be teaching digital literacy skills from a young age, and we should be looking at who and where and how we deliver that in a meaningful way. We have to get ahead of learning this at 2 a.m. on your own from unhelpful sources as a teenager. That's just not how things should be.
Yeah, it's so tough because, as you said, no one person is leading the charge, right? It's passing the hot potato.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Who has to figure all this out and tell everyone else?
Right. And I'm, we can talk to the VCs right now, can't we? Directly and say, hey, let's invest in the future of young people who are going to grow up and thrive in this space, in this commercial space, in a way that I would love to see is more evolved than just seeing children as data fodder. These are not just youngsters who are there to provide eyeballs and trend data for social media. These are youngsters who are the powerhouse of future economies. Let's enable them to be the makers, not just the consumers of this tech, and really explore how to thrive with it. And I think that's a kind of democratic imperative to do that, as well as one relating to GDP. This is big stuff. And so if we leave the kids till last, again, like we did with social media, we end up with an adult technology that's kind of used by children in really unhelpful and inappropriate ways at the best end of things, and highly illegal and harmful ones at worst.
When it comes to this, like obviously a big part of the equation is parents. How do you think about AI literacy for parents? What advice would you have? There are lots of parents listening to this today. From your perspective, working with many parents as well, what is your message for the parents out there who are listening?
Sure. So, and I as a parent myself, so I have an 11-year-old, and so I feel like I'm well positioned to answer this, also having worked, as you say, with families for many years. And I think there's some really interesting aspects to this. The first is that many parents feel quite a lot of shame in this space. And shame, as we know, if we've engaged with Brené Brown at any time in our lives, shame, as we know, is a really powerful emotion, and it locks down sharing and conversation and learning. And so the first thing we have to do is destigmatize not being familiar and not being an expert. It's okay to not know everything and to ask good questions. So I think that acknowledgement, first of all. The second thing is I really encourage parents to sit with their child. COVID actually has created a generation of children who have a screen between them and their parents. And I would love for parents to look at opportunities to be around the other side of the screen with the child and to be exploring together and to be playing together in a playful, fun way, not in a finger wagging, you're in trouble and I need to see what you're up to kind of way, because scrutiny isn't fun. And instead, perhaps letting go of judgment and enjoying having your child show you what they're looking at and what they're learning from and what they find engaging. I think that is incredibly powerful. There is huge value in community here, but we have to remember as well that social media will always polarize and create these spaces where there is lots of panic and drama, because that's what gets the likes. And again, that isn't necessarily helpful. Just more fear is not going to support parents. So we need good learning. We need reputable content, especially when it comes to narrowing the digital divide, those gaps that exist between those perhaps who are more and less privileged, which I worry could be deepened by some of these challenges around paid for versus freemium models, for example, and where you paying with yourself and your data where you are not able to buy a full subscription, that kind of thing. So supporting families, but breaking down some of those barriers is absolutely key. So reputable sources, get learning, sit with your child rather than on the other side of the screen.
I'm just curious, like if the parents' attitude is similar to when I was growing up around health class. Parents just assumed we learned everything from school or talking about any of that stuff related to health.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. It's like, whose job is it to talk about the awkward stuff? And one of the challenges in this area has always been that there is a sort of vague hope that it's somebody else's job, right? Surely there's an adultier adult who's going to deal with this for me. And while that is understandable, we can empathize with that. I think parents should be asking open, supportive questions of their school principals, their school leaders, and saying, hey, I would love for us to run a community program. I would love to explore how your digital citizenship program is going in school and how can I help with it? Let's look at engagement from a parent perspective in school communities, but also look at community hubs like libraries, for example, and other community learning opportunities, and see where there are spaces to build a sense of growth and learning and practice and familiarity. One of the things as adults that we forget to do, children learn through play. But as adults, we don't give ourselves that grace to play and get things wrong and just explore for the hell of it. And actually, we need to do that when there is something so expansive as AI. And so as an adult, giving yourself the grace to play and mess up and do silly stuff, I heartily encourage it.
That's one of my biggest philosophies or pillars when it comes to creating educational content. I feel like there's so much seriousness around it.
I find really bothersome. And I would love for young people to look at this and go, wow, what an amazing opportunity. What a fantastic opportunity to learn what I want. My biggest flex, if I may, was the day that Barack Obama followed me back. I will never top that. But it was a beautiful moment. And I was like, how is it possible that social media has allowed that shift to happen, that we can coexist in structures and spaces that allow us that amount of social capital? And now we have intellectual capital on top of it. We have data capital, comparative abilities to crunch information, manipulate information, and learn as much as we can conceptualize and then some. To see yourself as the victim of that as the starting point before you even engage seems like such a waste. If all of the world is a game and that there are finite games and infinite games, we know, don't we, that the tech industry is very much based on a finite game model. It's go fast or miss out. You have to break things and keep going and like power. It's got to be speed. But the education system is based on an infinite game model. And we are all there because we are part of something that's bigger than us and it will go on long after we have retired or moved on or got a promotion. But we give to it something that is much more than just the win-lose in the moment thing. And that clash when infinite game and finite game kind of language, it's oil and water, honestly. So you're losing out, you're missing out. That FOMO kind of talk does not wash with teachers and it is unhelpful. And then we just need to get rid of it, put it in the bin.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a big piece of kind of the media and the landscape around AI education, which is why I really talk about play. If I can get somebody to just like loosen up a little bit and just try using ChatGPT, asking some funny questions and see what happens, like usually a light bulb moment kind of goes off. Or I often see like the light bulb moment and people are like, whoa, I can have fun with this.
Yes,
and that's
in ways
where,
that you might not even expect. Honestly, there are so many serious ways in which I use it, but my very favorite way is to show it a picture of the food that's in my fridge right now and help me come up with dinner. It's not glamorous, but it makes such a massive difference to my day. And so those kinds of things are hugely empowering, playful, serious. We can have all of that.
A lot of what guides kind of like my TikToks, Instagrams and stuff, they're very high level on a broad range of topics. My whole goal is to get someone to just try it and have that light bulb moment where they have fun with it and they realize, oh, this is something that I want to explore more.
Yeah, and the minute you
kind of loosen up.
Yeah, exactly. The minute you lower the stakes and you make it okay to just have a play with it, the minute interesting things start happening, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, thanks so much for being on. As we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to discuss or?
No, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much. I will share the link to go check out my book if you're interested in finding out more about generative AI in the classroom. So very much a non-technical guide written for teachers to support the exploration of this exciting new technology in teaching and learning. And I would love to connect with your followers if people would like to discuss further about any of the things that we've raised today, particularly thinking around using AI well in education.
Yeah, and where can folks find you?
So do come and check me out. I'm on LinkedIn most of the time these days. So look at Ask Laura Knight, or you can go to my website, which is sapio.company.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being on.
Thank you.